And each of their stories is unique and very interesting. Leo Rajan, my son, his original name was Himanshu. He was the product of an illegal third trimester abortion at a nursing home near College Street. He was trafficked for adoption. I did not know that at the time. It's only been within the last 5 years that we've begun to understand the depth and breadth of the trafficking that went on, particularly in the years before the central government began regulating adoptions. Hallmarks of trafficking. We did not know as adoptive parents. We thought in terms of needy children who needed parents, and we were going to take our need and their need and join together as a family. But in fact, when you look at adoption agencies that did not traffic versus those that did, you see streams of newborns coming into the trafficking orphanages, and they're all abandoned. So all of us, being Westerners, just concluded that Indian women are so poor that they will just abandon their babies all over the place, hundreds of them. And of course, the first time I visited India with one of my children, they said, "Mommy, there's all these pavement dwellers and people living in shanty towns and busties. Their children are with them. So what is this about poor women just giving up a child just like that?" In fact, what we know is that mothers were tricked out of their children. Mothers were induced with monetary and other kinds of compensation. Children were stolen off the street. There are innumerable ways that children were created to be orphans. They were created orphans. They were not necessarily destined to be orphans. They were not all out of wedlock children who were discarded. So, my first son's adoption agency, now that we look back on it, streams of infants, they were all said to be abandoned. Almost no records. Very generic background information, nothing specific. Your mother must have been an unwed teenager. Nothing specific. And in this case, the adoption license had been repeatedly revoked and regained. But what we were told, India is a desperately poor country where women often abandon their babies. Not true. Because in fact, they put in cradling schemes in various places, and they're not getting that many babies. Well, why are there hardly any records? Well, this NGO is saving lives with every moment, and paperwork takes up precious time from saving lives. This was all very believable to us at the time. The generic information. This was a poor, unwed teenager who abandoned their child for fear of social stigma. It could well have been the child of a married couple out in the countryside who were induced through some kind of pressure or compensation to hand over their child in an unnatural way. And then why had this agency lost their adoption license multiple times? Oh, it's a vendetta by the government, by the Indian government. So any questions we had at the time, there were these answers. And they seemed like plausible answers to us. And we were focused on bringing our babies home and loving them. And we didn't ask a lot of deep questions. Now, this is International Mission of Hope, which is where Leo is from. It shut down quite some time ago. Sri Krishna Nursing Home, I don't know if you follow the news, but in 2016, huge baby selling ring was busted here in Kolkata. All the same people involved with my son's adoption agency, but this was trafficking for the domestic black market. Same techniques, same people. They've been making money at it for 40, 50 years. They're going to keep making money at it. Sri Krishna Nursing Home, where he was born, shuttered for trafficking. This is Vasanthi Chakrabarty, and I'll say her name out loud. She worked for his orphanage. She's an arrested trafficker. This is the director of his orphanage, known to have procured babies for adoption from known traffickers. We know this now. Leo is 31. We had no clue until the last 5 years or so about the depth of the trafficking. When there's an organization in Delhi called CARA, and it regulates adoptions in India. When CARA finally came into its power and was able to regulate across India, one of the things that the agencies that were most involved with trafficking did was they just shut down. They couldn't make their money easily anymore. They couldn't move children in and out with no questions asked. So indeed, as soon as CARA came around, International Mission of Hope closed. Now this is Leo, right after his birth, with one of his Mausies. We went to Sri Krishna Nursing Home. We met the doctor there who may have been present when Leo's mother's pregnancy was induced at 7 months in an illegal third trimester abortion. He's an arrested trafficker. His case is coming up shortly. And this is me at Newark Airport in October 1987, becoming a mother. And a funny story, my children thought that all babies came from airports. One day I said that our neighbor was about to have a baby and she'd be going to the hospital soon, and they said, well, when's she going to the airport? Okay, so what do we know from 60 years of international adoption? And this is not just India, this is every country in the developing world where adoptions have been done, have been sanctioned by the governments, and where the children have gone abroad. We know that wherever there are vulnerable families and children, whenever adoptions are sanctioned by local law, and as long as there are families abroad who want a child and have the means to pay, that children will be trafficked, that orphans will be created, that lies will be told, identities will be whitewashed, birth families will be exploited, government officials will conspire, including the judiciary, and huge profits will be made. This has happened in Korea, India, China, Cambodia, Vietnam, Guatemala, Russia, Romania, Uganda, Ethiopia, and every other country where international adoptions have taken place. Now you can imagine as an adoptive mother how the realization of this pattern of global trafficking has affected my feelings about how our family was created and what the options or differences could have been if things had been done differently. But at the time we were naive. And I'm not going to say that forming our family and having my children in the United States instead of here is in any way a bad thing for them. But we know that it is fundamentally wrong to separate a child from their parents, whitewash their identity, and ship them somewhere when they didn't need to be that way. The records here, especially for abandoned children, by the time they're declared abandoned by the court, their identity has been gone for so long, no one knows where they came from. Were they from 24 Pargana South? Were they from the city? Who knows? So, is there a possibility that DNA testing can help gain a little bit of identity for them? And as I mentioned, that if you're an American adoptee, the DNA testing almost always yields success. Now, the reunions between the birth families and the adoptees sometimes go well and sometimes don't go well. These are complex matters. It would be wonderful if my children could do what I did and get 1,000 matches and be able to explore who are those people, how are they related to me, could they possibly know my mother, could we figure out who my mother was? That's not going to happen. So we have to look at deeper roots. This is Leo. He's 99.4% South Asian. Of that, he's broadly South Asian. And this is interesting. I did a lot of looking into this because Our kids would like to know, well, am I from this district or that district? Well, sorry, your DNA can't tell you that. There's been too much admixture of people, such that in fact, Gujarati DNA and Bengali DNA really doesn't look that much different. So, there's no way that someone's going to say, well, you have Hooghly DNA versus Midnapur DNA. It's not happening. So fundamentally, he's South Asian. That's not too exciting. We looked at his health. He had no risks except the same I had, age-related macular degeneration. Nothing else came up for him. But this is very important because medical history can become critical. And I may know that there is early death from stroke in my family and what some of the warning signs are. I know there's diabetes in my family. I can modify my diet and my lifestyle. My children know nothing. And to have some medical history is a very valuable thing. Fortunately, nothing came up. I did upload his data to Prometheus, and he had some variants that were interesting. For instance, he has a 1.6 times increased risk for prostate cancer. And it's a pretty strong effect, and only 20% of the population has this variant. So it's significant. What does this say? Well, maybe he wants to start his routine prostate screenings a little early in life relative to others. Maybe he wants to do them a little more frequently. He can tell his doctor, I do have this genetic variant. Maybe his grandfather died of prostate cancer, but he'll never know that. He only can know what's in his DNA. But this is valuable information. He has a 7 times increased risk of male baldness. In fact, he started shaving his head because his hair was starting to reduce in the front. So we know that this genetic variant test has been very accurate. What I find interesting is they said, it's a bad thing. I don't think so. Now, he has some trace bits of DNA that are identified as Indonesian, Thai, Khmer, Myanmar, Siberian. And again, these bits, if you look at the colors and visualize them, these are called the centromeres of the chromosomes. And they represent, they're not directly in the middle, but they're sort of a midpoint of the chromosome. And around the centromeres are genes that are extremely critical for human survival. So this is where, as I said, your most ancient DNA will typically reside, sometimes at the very ends as well. And you can see, just as expected, these tiny trace elements representing ancient migrations and admixtures are right here by the centromeres. That's what you would expect. Neanderthal. Leo has less Neanderthal than 96% of all customers. I had more than 97% of all customers. What's the difference? I'm European. That's where the Neanderthals primarily mixed with Homo sapiens, not so much in South Asia. Now we get to some interesting things. His maternal haplogroup, which is the mitochondrial DNA, M5A. So you start looking at what that is. First thing, 60% of South Asians have macro haplogroup M in their mitochondrial DNA. So it's a very, very common group, but the highest frequency is in West Bengal. Calcutta is a big city, and we don't know for sure. We can look at him and make some guesses, but we can't say for sure that his parents didn't migrate from some other part of India, from Bihar, from Madhya Pradesh, from wherever. We get a clue here. His haplogroup has its highest frequency in West Bengal. That's a clue that he's probably Bengali. Now, the M5 branch of M is indigenous to India. So that means that the people who carry that haplogroup were in India when those variations started to happen that branched from M to M5. So that's an indigenous Indian haplogroup. It didn't come from external to India. And M5A has specifically been seen in what they call caste populations, which would be, I think, basically, I don't know how you would define that, but I think it means non-Muslim and non-Adivasi. Yeah. So that's another little clue, East Indian. This backs up the information we were given, but of course, we don't really know where his mother came from, so these clues start to form a pattern that allows us to draw some conclusions. Now, 23andMe offers these migration paths, and I kind of laugh because, you know, based on the science, we know that the theories change almost with the seasons, and we've been learning so much over time about the fact that there was not just one migration from A to B, but multiple migrations, back migrations, etc. But 23andMe is saying that his migration started in Africa, came to around this area, one branch branched over to North Africa and into Spain. Another branch came all the way to Central Asia and then split and went toward Europe. And finally, some of them went up into Siberia and down into Southeast Asia along the coast of India. That's the current theory of haplogroup L, which spawned M. And of course, M spawned M5A, and that's how it goes. Now, 23andMe said M5A is uncommon. Well, of course it is, because the majority of customers of 23andMe are Europeans, people with European background. So only 1 in 5,400 of the customers of 23andMe have M5A haplogroup. In fact, the highest diversity of M haplogroups is in India. So, although we knew he was from India, we knew he was from Calcutta, we knew he was probably East Indian, the computer that did the analysis of his DNA, as I have said, didn't know him at all. And based on knowing nothing about him, nothing about his story, nothing about him as an individual, was able to tell us this much.